People who have known victims of crimes that have appeared in the media. What happened after the media lost their interest in broadcasting? I know someone who was a teacher who supposedly hit a kid and there was a big media to do about it around here. She lost her job and works in a grocery store now. She was never found guilty, but it ruined her career. My very young cousin was abducted and murdered, and the police had tunnel vision for my aunt. It ended up being two people completely unrelated to us. The media was constantly painting my aunt in a bad light. Social media made it worse because every Joe Blow and Jane Doe Facebook detective was on the case, theorizing why she was the killer and bringing up our family's criminal history. This actually prolonged the investigation because they were so focused on my aunt, even going as far as to hire actors to get her to confess to them. The media dropped it as quickly as they had picked it up after the two scumbags went on trial. My aunt doesn't talk to anyone anymore and always asks for handouts on social media. My uncle, however, started a charity in my cousin's name and works to keep child murderers behind bars. I'm so very sorry for your cousin and her family. A local D-list celebrity in my small town had his house broken into so kids could throw a party. The story made national news even though he twisted the story to be way worse than it actually was. He claimed his house was trashed, but in reality his $1 million home was already falling apart and in foreclosure before the party. The graffiti on his property was actually done years before by his kids and their friends with his permission. Anyways, people across the country felt bad for him, so they sent him donations that he claimed he was going to put towards helping the kids who ruined his home. Years later, where did that money go? He kept all the money for himself and the kids or community didn't see a cent of it. I'm not saying the kids or community deserved the money, but he turned a bad day for himself into a way to scam a bunch of money from people all across the country. He made himself out to be this humble victim with a big heart. But once the media lost interest, he took the money and ran. I think he lives far away in Florida now. Not what you intended regarding crime, but here goes. In the early 90s, several members of my family were killed by an extremely drunk driver in the mid-morning rain. The drunk died too, but the one surviving relative, parent of two little girls who died on impact, lived but was left quadriplegic. She got a lot of media attention for about 10 years or so. The media used her, not exploitatively, as a cautionary tale and feel-good story, due to her PT recovery work, and she developed a lasting friendship with a specific reporter. My relative went on to raise two more little girls who are now young adults. Airbags, shoulder straps, and child safety seats might have saved them all. Hopefully the media's highlighting of their story changed some minds and influenced viewers to think about their family's safety. Buckle up and keep your kids protected. One of my mom's childhood friends was murdered by her ex-husband after she wouldn't take him back. He got life without parole. It got some coverage in the news around here, but it wasn't a national news story. It was absolutely horrific on the family. All of their kids lost both parents that day. My mom went to the funeral and she said there wasn't a dry eye in the room. What an awful thing to happen to a family. I'm glad to see justice was served. My cousin was killed by a man she went on a date with and there was some media attention. She had just divorced after a 20+ year marriage and he was the first guy she had a date with. The date didn't go well and she politely denied a second one. He showed up at her house really late, yelling and banging on the door so loudly a neighbor called police. She opened the door. He shot her twice and then himself. Media didn't report he didn't die instantly like she did. Medevac came out but he was so far gone they didn't load him in. He died at the scene. In 2016, my sister was murdered in a robbery gone wrong on vacation a week before she was supposed to come home. The local news wrote article after article about her murder and twisted the facts around. Journalists asking for interviews over and over when one of the most important people in your life was just murdered felt like an insult, and then they just forgot. It started up again during the trial and sentencing, but we were finally able to grieve once they were gone. I feel so bad for families who lose loved ones, not just because of how painful it is, but because of vile the media can be to the families who just want to grieve. I'm so sorry this happened to you and your family. Her baby was murdered by the dad's new girlfriend. It was set up like a home invasion, but the truth came out. The girlfriend was sentenced to life imprisonment. 15 years later, mom is living in a small town. has 2 more kids. She has moved on. Every so often there is a follow-up article. It was only local media, but I knew both the victims and the perpetrator of a double homicide. The perpetrator was a friend and high school classmate. He murdered his grandparents. He fled to Mexico in their car. He turned himself in days later, and he went to prison for maybe 30 years or so. He got married while in prison. He is out. No idea if they're still married or what he is up to now. I don't want to know him. I hope he got help for whatever his problems were and that he lives productively now, if only for those who must live near him. The son of a really wealthy family got murdered, and while everyone was talking about the absolute horrifying circumstances surrounding the crime the parents managed to keep for themselves, almost 15 years later, everybody is still talking about the killer, because it was very gruesome. But the family of the victim has managed to, very quietly, build up a charity for the victims of crimes that is very well hidden and works wonders behind the scenes, providing legal counsel and therapy for once someone managed to get out of victimization, and they wouldn't have gotten there with the media looking and disturbing. The best deeds are done with good intention, not for attention. My best friend was kidnapped in high school and has still not been found to this day. 24 years ago, I grew up in a very small northern town. She was the only black person in our town. Everyone said at the time it wasn't race related, but having grown up there, and being biracial myself, I knew this was 100% race related. Everyone knew she was my best friend, so people would stop talking every time I would walk into a room, for months. I remember being triggered when I could hear the helicopters which were conducting overhead searches, and boats which were drag searching the local lake. At one point, the local news reporter and cameraman came running into the school property to ask me, "What do you think happened to Melanie?" I burst out crying, of course, but the vice principal came running out to tell the reporters to leave. Her mother was broken and her younger sister was about 7-8 at the time. We put posters up for months together, hiked in her favorite trails, talked to everyone in our town, but nothing. We knew each other quite well, but as her disappearance went on, her mom got more and more quiet. Her little sister used to be the happiest little girl and now barely spoke. The effects on her family were truly heartbreaking. Her picture started appearing on the back of transport trucks, billboards and everywhere on storefronts. "Have you seen Melanie?" Crime Stoppers raised the reward to $25,000, then $50,000, but still nothing. If anyone knows any information about Melanie's disappearance from Northern Ontario, please, I am begging you, tell the authorities. You can stay anonymous, but there would be nothing better than to give her mother and sister the final peace of mind that they have been trying to find for almost 25 years now. I was the victim of assault by an NFL player a few years ago. I didn't know who he was when it happened. I was at work and called the police on him. It was a circus. The media called my parents and told them what happened before I got a chance to. I refused to let them release a video of the incident. I was made out to be a gold digger and all sorts of other things online. I never got a dime or any justice even. He was given like 3 hours of community service. I was relieved when it was all over. My life went back to normal and I was able to safely be at my home and work without fearing reporters harassing me. I do want to say that it has greatly changed my perspective on how the media treats victims and celebrities. The story that is presented online is usually far from what actually happens to victims and gets too many personal irrelevant details involved. And blaming a victim is always wrong. They didn't ask to be a victim, and often they just wish their life would be whole again. The daughter of one of my colleagues was murdered on her college campus by her ex-boyfriend after she'd broken up with him upon finding out he was older than originally claimed and a registered sex offender. He stalked her around campus for weeks, and university police didn't take the threat seriously. The media coverage has faded, but resulted in campuses around the country adopting bylaws that any student who feels threatened can request a security escort. My 6-year half-sister was killed by her biological father, who then committed suicide. My family had asked the police and media to not publish the details of what went down, except the strict minimum for their public records, but they released all the informations anyway. It brought a lot of unwanted attention from other newspapers and the public to us in a time where we just wanted to grieve in peace and not be reminded of it every single day with a new article in trash tabloids. exploiting and adding new sordid details to the story. Eventually they moved on to other news, but it still did a lot of damage in my family. I was barely a teenager when it happened, so my parents didn't tell me all the details, but they were quite easy to find online. I wish I hadn't had access to those at that time. I am so sorry for your loss. Hope you and your family are doing well. Surviving victim here. Pretty much nothing. After some years, it's business as usual. Even family don't talk about it at all. I mean, you're the center of attention for a while, is invited to interviews and photos with police officers and such. But soon it's life as usual. Once a TV show wanted to do a in-depth of cases of, in my home state, I refused an interview. They used old footage anyway. Got in the spotlight for another couple of weeks. And that's it. If I got some trauma, I worked with some mental pros, and time helps to heal. I don't know if this was in the media or not because none of my siblings were born yet, but I don't think it'd be easy to forget my uncle tying my dad to a tree naked, or that same uncle tying my other biological uncle to a hang glider that's attached to a four-wheeler. He was also in a TV special in 2005 titled The Dumbest Criminals in America. I'd be nervous about being around your uncle and any ropes, straps, string, etc. All the attention after a shooting usually focuses on the dead, but people injured by firearms can have very long, very painful physical recoveries and are often never the same. The mental recovery is just as bad or worse. Not to mention the shooter. The attention the shooters get in these situations is one of the reasons why there will be more shooters. Crippling depression and PTSD, and a lot of anger. A friend's ex-wife and their 10-year-old daughter were viciously murdered by the ex-wife then ex-boyfriend. It took about 10 more years for him to touch anything, and the little girl's room birthday presents were still laid out as she was coming back from her visitation with mom. Truly horrific and heartbreaking. This happened to a close relative of mine. He wasn't the victim but a witness. He was a 30-something-year-old man. At approximately 5 p.m., he walked past a park playground. A group of kids, 14-17 years old, were playing in the park. He didn't notice anything peculiar or out of the ordinary in his words. It just seemed like a group of kids horsing around in a playground. The next morning, police knocked on his door. Apparently one of the kids claimed to have been the victim of a heinous crime with at least two of the other kids as the culprit. The person I know couldn't tell the police much as the only thing he observed was a group of kids doing group of kids things in the park. He didn't stop to talk or interact with the kids. He didn't observe anything noteworthy and couldn't even identify any of the kids with any certainty. The next several months was an ordeal for him. The police prosecutors treated him as though he was in collusion with the accused. They doubted everything he said, tried to intimidate him into saying more demonizing things about the accused. Eventually everyone in the neighborhood became aware of the alleged crime and his supposed role in it. He was the victim of a few petty vandalism incidents. Needless to say, the police were no help. Between neighbors ostracizing him and the police treating him like a criminal, he eventually decided to move. He didn't go to the other side of the world or anything, just to a new city county, though he really didn't do anything wrong. The feeling from law enforcement was, a crime was committed. Either you're on the cop's side or you were on the criminal's side. It made his life miserable. A friend of mine was murdered in high school. It was all over the news and there is a lot of speculation as to what happened. This lasted about a week, and as soon as all the hysteria died down, they ruled her death as suicide. Not a shred of evidence points to her committing suicide. Literally nothing matches up. The media started digging up more records and they reopened the case recently. But now that the media is dying down again, they haven't been working on the case at all. Funny how that works. We had two large scandals at the end of my senior year of high school. 2 weeks before graduation, the principal stepped down to spend more time with his family. Of course, the entire student body found this incredibly sus. It eventually came out that he had an affair with one of the teachers, and she had ended it. One night after a luet of alcohol, he went to her house and climbed up a window on the ladder. Except, he was drunk. So he peeped into her high school age daughter's bedroom. I'm not entirely sure what he's up to now. The other scandal was our choir director. They went on their annual choir trip, and apparently he forced all of the girls to change on the charter bus while he was still on it. I was in choir for a couple of years but quit my senior year after he accused me of drug abuse after I returned from an institution for, not happy thoughts time. There were rumors of him groping multiple female students, which I wholeheartedly believe. He was fired, sold cars for a little bit, and now he's a teacher again. The West Mesa murders. One of the girls was my husband's sister. Found buried on the mesa. 11 girls and 1 fetus in 2009. Murderer never caught. Probably will never be. Not much of their aftermath story. The families all continued on with their lives and media coverage usually happens on an anniversary. A park was built for them in memory. 11 trees planted for each girl. To this day no one talks about it. An ex-fling of mine murdered my brother's best friend and fled to Thailand. There was no nationwide coverage, but local news was on top of it. This was 21 years ago and ex's mum would make frequent pleas in our local rag for information, but unfortunately she died a few years ago, never seeing her son's murderer taken to court. My brother kept in contact with her and she was just broken. My brother is broken too. He was there when they turned off life support. The last 2 years, the local paper has renewed their appeal for information even after her death. Worst thing is that I know old mutual friends regularly have and do take trips to Thailand since ex was murdered. I cannot prove anything so I'm in a bind. Not exactly the victim, but I was very close with the sister of a girl convicted of killing her baby when she was 15. The baby was found frozen in a cornfield in the middle of winter. She claimed it was stillborn, that she panicked and tried to hide it. After she went to prison, the media still dogged the family like crazy. We were young middle schoolers at the time, but reporters would follow my friend home after getting off the bus, trying to get her to comment on her sister. It got so bad they moved out of their house and in with my friend's grandparents for 2 years. By the time things calmed down with reporters, the sister was up for parole and her name was right back in the media. It was a nightmare. ETA. The story was a tragedy all around. I will say though, some good did come out of it. As a result of this case, our state adopted its first safe haven law. Now any mother can drop off a newborn to a hospital, fire station, police station or church anonymously without fear of consequence. It has saved countless infants' lives. A boy I went to school with got hit by a car by an American diplomat's wife last year in the UK and died. The woman who hit him went back to America and claimed diplomatic immunity to avoid being held accountable for the crime. I don't want to use names, but I imagine many people will know the case I'm talking about. It's still in the news a lot and has turned into a huge diplomatic row and fight for justice. I sort of grew up with him and still live in the same village as his family, so I know the local reaction quite well. Everyone in our village and surrounding villages have been fully behind the family fighting for justice for their son. People have tied green ribbons to everything. Their cars, their front doors, their fences, as a symbol to remember him by and to show their solidarity. I occasionally see the boy's parents out walking through the village and it's difficult to think of the amount of pain they must be going through. He had a really nice funeral and there have been a few fundraising events since trying to raise money for legal funds to fight the case. The parents went to the US to meet with Donald Trump, who was apparently quite nice in person. But I imagine they're still upset he hasn't done the right thing by forcing the driver to return to the UK to be prosecuted. They also met with members of the British government about the case, but the dad came out saying they were only doing that to score political points in the run-up to a general election. Once it was no longer in the government's interest to be seen to be helping them, they didn't care so much. I don't know how much to say because everything is still very raw and a lot of people in our community are still very upset by what's happened and I imagine not many people will end up reading this anyway. Also, some of this is stuff I've just heard going around the village, not directly from the family, so it might not be 100% how they feel about it. But yeah, I thought it might be nice to let people know that, despite being let down by both US and UK governments, as well as the legal system, there is a sense of togetherness in the local area and we are all behind the ongoing fight for justice. Anna Sakoulas should face justice. No amount of apologies can justify it. Stupid mistake or not, driving on the wrong side of the road. Actions have consequences and she should come back to the UK voluntarily, since the US won't allow her to be extradited and tried for her negligent manslaughter. My friend and her husband were left to die by a hit-and-run driver in Florida. They think the guy attempted to go to the hospital out of guilt, thinking the couple were both comatose. Man was, wife wasn't, but they never found him. They have had to have some major surgeries. The husband had to have a trach and everything. And this happened between jobs, so they didn't have insurance. It's a miracle the husband lived, and he's had to be rushed back for major surgeries. Thought he was going to have a trach for life, and it's just been a crap show. Now, their insurance company's supply side has been heck to deal with. The doctor will order something and they can't get it for months. They had some sort of device he needed for the trach. I couldn't tell you the name, and they needed to send it back to one company. The company told them to keep it till they got one from their insurance, and if they hadn't, they'd have been without it for months. And this is with BCBS insurance. Now, they are at extra risk due to COVID, and the COVID deniers want to show up to their house without masks. Whoever got away with it deserves all the guilt they got, because my friends have suffered every day from suddenly having mobility difficulties in such a fricked up healthcare system, and the husband now being at high risk of dying from COVID. A neighbor of my godmother murdered his wife right across from her home whilst she slept. My godmother was absolutely distraught as she had known them for over 20 years and never thought of him as the kind of person to hurt someone. She was on the news and spoke about how nobody had heard a thing. It's honestly terrifying how you don't even know what the people in your neighborhood are capable of. I went to high school with Brianna Dennison. After she went missing, it felt like she was all over the news, and again when they found her body. But even with all the coverage, it all felt very personal. It was an extremely small high school, so we all knew each other pretty well. My town never really got over it. The media forgot about it within the year. There was an Indian family who lived in my hometown. The youngest son was one of my fiance's best friends in the 90s. The eldest son in the family moved to another state because he married a black woman, which his father didn't approve of. In 2000, two men broke into their house while eldest son was at work and strangled his wife with a vacuum cleaner cord in front of their 7-month-old daughter. She was left unharmed. It appeared to be a break-in gone wrong, though they didn't take anything. 6 years later, the two killers were caught in another state for committing a different crime. They admitted that they were hired as hitmen by the young black woman's Phil to kill her. He was tried and sentenced to life in prison without parole. To this day, he shows no remorse and openly hates black people. The youngest son, the one who was friends with my fiance, is still in complete denial that his father had that woman killed because of her race. The victim's parents ended up adopting their granddaughter because her father could not go on without his wife. Very sad story. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.